Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this timely and critical conversation on the future of federal education policy in America. I'm Emily Eakins, and I'm a vice president here at the Cato Institute. We are honored to be joined today by the United States Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. Secretary, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here at the Cato Institute. Secretary McMahon is a groundbreaking entrepreneur and long-standing advocate for innovation, deregulation, and limited government. While we are here today to discuss education policy, many of you may know Secretary McMahon from her pre-government work. Among many other successful roles, the Secretary co-founded the company that would become World Wrestling Entertainment, also known as the WWE. Now, one of the most iconic sports entertainment companies in the world. Perhaps this experience helped prepare her for the tumultuous world of government. Pivoting from business to government 8 years ago, then Administrator McMahon led the Small Business Administration from 2017 to 2019. During that time, she championed regulatory reform and small business growth. After taking a well-deserved break from government, Secretary McMahon is back to lead the Federal Department of Education, but with a possibly unprecedented mission: to end the department that she has been tasked to lead. And this brings us to questions that many are asking. Should we have a federal Department of Education? What is best for educating our nation's children? Joining Secretary McMahon on stage also is Cato's Director of the Center for Educational Freedom, Dr. Neil McCluskey, who is a fierce advocate of dismantling the U.S. Department of Education. For decades, Neil has made the intellectual and constitutional case for more freedom in education and how getting the federal government out of education can improve the education our nation's children receive today. Today, I am thrilled to introduce this conversation that goes to the heart of Cato's mission: advancing individual liberty and limited government. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Linda McMahon and Neil McCluskey.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I want to tell you, it has been my lifelong dream to meet the last U.S. Secretary of Education. So thank you for making that come true, we hope.
But we're working on it. We're working on it.
And I should say, it's not quite lifelong. I know I look pretty young, but the department turned 45 on May 4th. I'm actually a little older than that.
Me too.
But it feels like a lifetime that we've had the department, but it's actually pretty young. So you have, as we know, been tasked with closing the department and returning authority over education to the states. Why do you think doing that is a good thing?
Well, first of all, thanks so much to Cato for having me this afternoon and to be able to visit with you and to chat about this. You know, the president certainly feels, as I do, that education is best handled closest to the child. It is parents, teachers, superintendents who are with these children every day, who understand the interaction between communities and the schools, who can best handle that education assignment, because there is no one-size-fits-all in education, and I think we really have to digest everything that is around what is educating our children at the time, and that's best handled closest to the states.
I couldn't agree more with that. So as you and the administration start to look at drawing down the department and the federal role in education, how much do you think that the administration can do on its own? How much does Congress do? And is there sort of a path that you see for doing this?
Well, the operational, and it's no small task. The operational side are the pieces I think we can put in place easiest. But as we look to take parts of the Department of Education and flow them into different agencies where they might fit, that's the side we can attack, right away. But ultimately, this department was set up by statute. Congress will have to vote to close it. And I think it's going to be very incumbent upon us, as we have assumed this task, to make sure that we are being very transparent with Congress, that we're bringing them along as we are doing different aspects of it. And I'm trying to do that as we are starting out. But in the end, they're going to have to vote with us, and I hope that we will show them in the end that what we're putting in place and how we're trying to redirect the policy will be, in the end, be best for students and for education in total in our country. I mean, you know this very well, that our recent NAEP scores, which is the national report card for our country, showed just awful scores throughout the country. I mean, 4th and 8th graders are just have terrible scores. And we look at 8th graders, who are, reading at 30% proficiency, just 30%. And, and in math scores, even worse. So we're doing something wrong. And when I have talked to different senators who've said, well, geez, how are you going to shut down the Department of Education? And I said, well, we have had this department in place since 1980. We've spent over $3 trillion. Our scores keep going down. We're clearly not doing something right. So let's take another shot at it.
Mm. So the idea, I think, ultimately is to return authority to the people and to the states, which is where the Constitution puts that authority. Are there particular states you would see as kind of exemplars where we can tell that if you give them the authority, that it will be better outcomes for kids?
Well, I can tell you there are some states that have had some great success being innovative with different programs in their states. For instance, we've heard of the Mississippi Miracle, where children in Mississippi were ranked next to last in reading proficiency. And they adopted this program, and this was without federal intervention. This was no mandate from the federal government to do this. But innovative teachers and superintendents and an innovative governor and a program within the state called, the science of reading and getting back to basics of reading, learning to read with phonics, like probably many of us might have done in this room. And it showed great success, and they went from being next to last to being in 21, in terms of the 50 states. And so that was a huge accomplishment. Last year, the state of Louisiana in the NAEP scores was the only state in the nation that really showed improvement with the NAEP scores, again, adopting the science of reading and kind of getting back to basics. And so I think there are a couple of great examples. We've seen good outcomes in Florida. We've seen great outcomes in some charter schools as well as public schools. So we're looking at programs, not necessarily the full assumption of education, within the state, but, only time will tell. We'll see. But I really do believe it is the best thing to happen for students in our country.
Yeah. You definitely want to have, control as close to the individual student as possible, and having the federal government makes decisions is as far as you can get from the individual
Absolutely.
students.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I was talking with a parent in kind of a Q&A session, and this parent asked me, said, well, I'm really afraid, that if I have a special needs child, and I'm really afraid that if the Department of Education goes away, that there won't be anybody there, looking out for my child. And I said, well, let me pose the question to you this way. You were with your child. The teachers in the classroom are with that child. They see if that child needs something, with technology or, some kind of health device that would improve them and their learning abilities. And the teachers in the classroom see that. Who's better able to help your child? You and that group, or somebody like me, a bureaucrat sitting in Washington, D.C., far removed from the actual scene? I mean, the answer is obvious.
So that actually brings up something I was going to ask about later. But one of the concerns I hear the most is, well, if we get rid of a Department of Education, won't that sort of leave kids with disabilities without someone to protect them and to be their advocate? So are you saying that actually somebody else is probably better situated to be their advocate, and they shouldn't worry that protections are going away?
Well, I think the protections are the ones closest to the child. The people that are interacting with that child every day, the teachers, parents, paraprofessionals that are in the classroom, much better. Now, if we're worried about the funding that's coming, that funding is going to continue through IDEA, which is for students with special needs. It may flow through a different agency, it may flow in a different way, but that funding is going to continue, and the president's been very, very specific about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that also brings us to, people have been, some have said, well, can you operate the department with fewer people? So you're down to, I think the department's maybe down from 4,200 to 2,200. It seems to me you can run a lot leaner if you want to. Is that your experience, that now that you've seen those, is the department able, as it exists now, to do its jobs with a leaner workforce?
Yeah, it absolutely is. We set about to take a drastic, reaction. First of all, to cut spending, and also to look at duplication of efforts and what we were doing. And I've done this in the private sector. We called it restructuring in the private sector. Here it's been a RIF. So what you really find is you always just want to cut fat, and you're going to try to avoid cutting muscle. Sometimes you cut into the muscle and you cut a little too deep, and we brought some people back. Not a lot, but we did find that we cut a little bit deep, so we brought some people back. But what we're really finding is the cooperation between the people who are there. We've moved people out of district offices, more into the DC offices, and we have a lot more collaboration, and I think our productivity is even better. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I look forward to the day when there's nobody in the department, because there is no more department. And that...
Well, I can tell you a little bit of a funny story with the president.
Sure.
Here's what we're going to do. When we actually close down the department, you and I are going to stand on the steps, and we're going to have a padlock we're going to put on it and invite the press. You might find that surprising for President Trump to have that kind of vision.
Can I also attend?
Certainly, you're invited.
All right, good. All right, so I'm looking forward to that. I think when we talk about the department and where to move things, I think people, maybe their first thought when they hear the Department of Education is about elementary and secondary education. I don't think they realize that probably the biggest thing the department does is administer student loans. I once saw somebody say that the Department of Education is a bank with a policy shop attached, which I thought was pretty interesting. So if the Department of Education, is dismantled, where do you think that should go? Is there a department that's better situated to run those programs as long as those programs exist?
Surely, we're looking at some of those things now, and we've restarted collections on the student loan program. Just as an aside of what we're talking about, we had stopped collecting. COVID hit. It was a pause put on student loans for a bit, which I think was appropriate. But after COVID was no longer, we didn't restart student loan collections. So since March of 2020 until 2 weeks ago, May 5th, when letters went out again, no student loan dollars had been collected, except for those who were voluntarily continuing to pay. But we had over 5 million and some who are not paying. So we've restarted that through Treasury. Now, Treasury was doing a lot of that collection effort before, but I really do think that a natural area for student loans to reside is in the Department of Treasury. Secretary Bessent and I have had 2 or 3 conversations about that. We're going to kind of see how this relaunch starts. But I'm very happy to report we've already collected about $58 million in about 2 weeks. So that's we're off to a good start. And I'll continue down this stray line for a minute. Think about that. We added $60 billion in debt just over these few years since we've not collected. But why would anybody have been paying during the Biden administration when he continually talked about canceling student loans? So that was one of the reasons that we had such a fall off, of people repaying the loans. But I do think a natural place for it to reside would be in Treasury. They really are a bank. And we're not.
Yeah. I was actually going to go to the collection, so you didn't stray too far from what I was going to talk about, because certainly I was very concerned about just saying don't ever repay the loans. Now, my answer is that we really shouldn't have these loan programs. But if we have them, I thought that there was a lot of very dire reaction to, on May 5th, starting to collect loans, including from people who weren't repaying. And I was just curious how we got to this point and what your thoughts are on how do we get to the point where there was an assumption that, well, you really shouldn't repay them.
Well, how many of you in the audience would decide not to pay your mortgage or to pay your car payments or whatever? I mean, they're going to come take your house or they're going to come and take your car. But this is really, it's a moral obligation if you take out a student loan. You owe this money. But the collateral is a degree or whatever happened, with that money, and it's really hard, to get that money back. But you owe the money. And if the government, during the Biden administration, had simply canceled those loans or said, we forgive the loans, it's not really forgiveness. It's just someone else shouldering the burden of paying that loan, and that's just not fair. So we can't have that.
Yeah,
it's your responsibility. You borrow the money, you repay it. Now, let me say, thank you, but let me say that we're not trying to be, just, the tough guys coming after this money. There's the programs that, that you can go into student, aid.com. I'll never get that right. I think I'm close. And, but it's on the website. And you can go and you can check that and look it out. And we've got a loan simulator. You plug in your finances or whatever, and it'll kind of help guide you as to how much you can afford to be repaying on your loan. We have increased office hours for the loan servicers. They're open, I think, till 11 o'clock at night and on weekends now. So trying to help develop programs to get people out of default. Because if you're in default, it's affecting your credit score mightily. You can't buy a house or you can't buy a car. So the goal is, yes, to get the money repaid, but the goal is to make it possible for people to get on a program to repay. So my advice is make those calls, get the program started, because Treasury will eventually garnish wages. Treasury right now is also in the process of, if you have refunds that are coming, through taxes to take those refunds. And so that's where we are now. But get on the program, start repaying in a way that suits you.
So ending the department is largely about devolving power away from Washington. But the administration is sort of pushing Harvard for some changes and states to change things like some of their high school athletics policies. Is that sort of consistent with eliminating the department? I mean, is there maybe another place that should be doing it other than department? Is it a federal role?
Well, if you think about the fact that if you've got men and women's sports, that's a Title IX violation. That can very well come under the Department of Justice for those issues. If you've got civil rights, that should go under the Department of Justice. I mean, we have an Office of Civil Rights and Education, but they have many more, in the Department of Justice. That seems a natural place for that to reside. Mm-hmm. So so looking at where the proper fit is, I mean, all of these things happened before there was a Department of Education. Mm-hmm. All this funding, Title I funding, IDEA funding for students with special needs, that all happened before there was a Department of Education. The states managed to get the funds, the programs were put in place, and we took care of defending civil rights. And so I think we can clearly do that without a Department of Education, do it more efficiently, and do it better.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that people get very worried about when they hear that we're getting rid of the Department of Education and don't realize, yes, the federal government has a civil rights enforcement job, but it also has a Department of Justice to do that.
Yes.
And that, I think this also blends in with IDEA too, that there's a feeling that if there's no Department of Education, you'll be abandoned. But that's not really true.
That's definitely not true. And I do believe the states would have a more focused view on it if we were there. And there may be parts of IDEA that would flow through HHS, mm-hmm. which is actually where it used to be when it was Health, Education, and Welfare before the Department of Education was stood up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about National Assessment of Educational Progress Scores. For people who aren't totally familiar with that, that is a federal sort of suite of exams, but it doesn't have any ramifications attached. So if you don't do well on it, you don't get punished as a state or a school district. But that means it can be a pretty good barometer of what kids know because you're not working to maybe strategize or game the test. As I understand it, was originally zeroed out, but is not anymore. So can you tell us a little bit about what the future of NAEP might look like?
Oh, our NAEP program is clearly up and running. Our contracts are in place even for the 26-27 year to have NAEP. We think it's important to continue with NAEP testing that takes place every other year because it is it's an objective. And it's constantly comparing apples to apples. It's a nationally funded and nationally run test because sometimes states can vary questions or have it be a little bit more favorable to one or the other. So this one really compares apples to apples, and I think gives us a consistent barometer of where each state lies.
Mm-hmm. And is there, so again, in my dream scenario, when this department is gone, is there a place that maybe NAEP, another department or place that NAEP could go and maybe some data collection? Because the federal government has long been involved in collecting data about education.
I think your private contractors, they can be hired to do that work. It's very possible it could reside in the National Science Foundation. There are definitely places for it to reside and must continue. I think that's going to be very important for it to continue.
Great. Another thing that we work on a lot at the Cato is school choice. Mm-hmm. We think school choice is very important, that you want to empower families, so we really don't like the federal government telling people what to do. We're not huge fans of the state or even school districts if we think we can empower families. What do you think is the role of the federal government in school choice, and is even the department doing some things with school choice?
Well, certainly President Trump feels that it is very important for families, parents, students to have choice of where they go to school. He does not believe that any child should be trapped in a failing school. He's a strong supporter of charter schools, homeschooling, religious education schools. he believes that we need to have as many forms of education, as we can, and there should be that freedom of choice to attend those schools.
Mm-hmm. And is there a federal role, I think in particular of DC, where clearly there's a role, and I think the department just did something for pervasively dangerous schools. So we're looking at ways that the federal government can be involved in school choice, like in the military, like DC, but not necessarily everywhere. But I think it's good that we have this support for school choice here in Washington. One of the other concerns is if we want Congress to act, sometimes I worry that members of Congress or just the public, they see education in the name of the Department of Education. It's like, well, if we get rid of that, then that just ends education because look, education is in the name. Do you think there's a way to help educate the public and members of Congress or anybody else whose first reaction is, well, it says education there, and so we got to keep it because it's bad education? What do we need to sort of make folks like that understand?
Well, I think you need to understand what the Department of Education does not do. We don't set curriculum. We don't buy books. We don't hire teachers in states. We don't do any of those things. We're really more of a pass-through of funding at this particular point, which, as I've mentioned before, can pass through other agencies. We want to get that money directly to the states as quickly as possible. So let's take the bureaucracy out of Washington that costs money and have more money than be able to get to the child. But clearly, the president is not looking to do away with education. He's looking to take away the bureaucracy of education, improve education, strengthen it in the states, and let the curriculum be decided in those areas where the communities know what would work best for them. I mean, the curriculum that's decided in New York City may be different than the curriculum that's decided somewhere in the Midwest, because the communities have different needs. There may be, in a farming community, more agrarian courses that are taught, which makes the students then that are graduating more ready to come right into that environment. And I think it's important because if we're looking at education overall, one of the strongest things that comes out of education is being ready to go to work. Being ready to earn a living, being ready to be able to, to survive. And so education, I think, really needs to be tied more into our workforce development, in projects. And I'm a strong believer that in middle school and high school, we should be doing more education that is geared towards workforce development, more hands-on learning. And we're seeing more of that happen now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people also hear, well, you're getting rid of the Department of Education and there'll be no common curricular standards for all states. And importantly, what you just said is true. The federal government and the department are not supposed to set curriculum.
Correct.
Is there a value to having states be able to do different things without the federal government saying, well, this is what everybody should be achieving? And does NAEP maybe play a role in that?
Well, it does, and I think what I mentioned before about these two states that had gone back to sort of classical learning of reading, and they did that without any kind of mandate from the federal government. They did it on their own. They might have done some grant bidding to get some money for it, but I don't know that. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that information is available. I just don't know it at the moment. But this was the states with their own initiative, and states will be competitive with one another. Some are going to do much better than others when they have more autonomy with what they're doing. But I think all in all, we're going to see scores go up for our students. We're going to get more money closer to those students, and we'll have the bureaucracy out of the way.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of laboratories of democracy being able to work, and I think that's...
You mean like a federalism or something?
Oh, what a great word. We should use that at Cato sometime. So I'm going to remember to include that.
I thought I'd just throw that out there in case you hadn't thought of it.
Yeah, everybody write down federalism because that's kind of important. So you've been in office roughly 75 days. I didn't quite count it exactly. Maybe it is 75 days. But so 75 days in, how do you think things are going?
They're going at lightning rocket speed because we all just keep trying to keep up with the president. And it's, you know, he's issued a lot of executive orders, all with such good programs in place, but we're the ones that have to implement them. And so he has a very, very busy agenda, and I think we're just accomplishing so many things, you know, following his agenda, and I'm enjoying it.
Well, and it's also a think tank analyst full employment program, because I know I'm busy every day keeping up with it. So we're going to go to Q&A. I want to give just a few ground rules. Sometimes when I do events, I say, oh, feel free to talk about whatever you want, and we'll respond to it. Obviously, we have a lot of people here today, and we're not going to do that. So when you ask a question, I'd like you to be brief, and we want to try and stay on topic. So the topic today is really about the Department of Education and where it should go, what should be done with it. If you have something else you want to talk about, maybe that's better for another event. We really want to focus on the department because we really have limited time, and there are a lot of people who are interested in this. Also, sometimes people like to ask a question and then sort of start yelling a follow-up. We don't really have time for follow-up, so once you've asked a question, that's it. So you better think long and hard that you have the most efficient question, because there are no do-overs. You're just going to get the question that you ask. So basically, efficiency is kind of the name of the game here. So with that, we'll start looking for people. We've got folks online, which also reminds me, I have to open this so I can see the people online. People here, and I'm going to try and make sure that we get around to as many people in as many different places as possible. And so I think we have our first question over here.
Hi, Kayla Gaskins with Sinclair. So the Department of Education has focused heavily on reforming the culture at higher education, focusing a lot on the Ivy League and Harvard. Do you see that focus expanding and shifting outside of elite universities? And if so, what does that look like?
Well, first of all, let's really kind of focus on exactly what the Department of Education has done relative to a few of the elite universities. We have launched investigations into others, but the first one we started with was Columbia, really generated by the anti-Semitism activities that had gone on campus, and for their lack of being able to get that under control, the president campaigned on the fact that he was not going to tolerate anti-Semitic behavior on campuses, and so I met with the then president of Columbia. We talked about that. We talked about things we thought would be improvements to protect civil rights on campus. But then we went beyond anti-Semitism to really discuss what causes some of the unrest on campus. I mean, and the president, even, you know, in one of his remarks or speeches, he said he just didn't understand why there was so much hate on campuses when students were there to study and to learn. And he didn't think the universities were doing enough to protect the civil rights and the safety of the students. And so we talked to Columbia. We stopped some of the funding, not only from our agency, but with the joint task force that we have with DOJ, with GSA, and with HHS. HHS is a lot of the funding for universities because they do a lot of research, good research. And we want that to continue, but we really wanted universities to focus on really what they were there for and how students could actually best be served and protected, because we were first accused of attacking First Amendment rights. This is not First Amendment. This is protecting civil rights on these college campuses because lives were in danger, safety was an issue, and students were afraid to go to class. So we're not really trying to restructure colleges, so to take a little bit of your framing off of that, but just to say we want what is best for students on campus who are receiving federal funding. They need to comply with federal law.
All right, I have a question from somebody who's online, and this is a question probably near and dear to the heart of Andrew Gillen, who is our higher education expert. This is from Lee Havis. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But they say, how about the U.S. government get out of the business of federal recognition, in quotes, of private accrediting agencies under HEA? What's wrong with competition and free choice among private education agencies? HEA, which is the Higher Education Act, I should have said, provides other means to monitor funding college tuition and grants, right? Is there something that should be done about accreditation, basically, to make it better?
It's a really big topic and a big issue right now. In fact, we are looking at expanding the number of accreditors in the Department of Education, which takes a couple of years. But I mean, if you think about it, it's almost a monopoly. Every law school has to get an accreditation from the ABA, American Bar Association. Well, what kind of control is that for many, many, many years over the law schools, in our country? And there are accreditors who are assigned to different regions of the country. So if you're in Florida and you have an accreditor that's part of the Southeast, but you really don't feel like you're getting your fair shake from these accreditors, and they may be putting all kinds of demands on you that are not necessarily what are looked at by another group of accreditors, and so you'd like to change your accreditation group, you're not allowed to do that. So steps are being put in place. We're looking at being able to pick your accreditors and change and expanding the role of the number of accreditors that are out there. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I think there's been a proposal in Congress so that states can also accredit so that there's a lot more choices.
Sure, and we've heard that too.
Yeah.
And that just kind of depends on, if you think about it, why do you have accreditors in the first place? Well, accreditors, it's like getting the good housekeeping seal of approval. So, parents may look at it and say, well, this is accredited by XYZ Accredited Association, so that means that these employers that I have heard, they hire more people from colleges who receive that kind of accreditation. That's how kind of all of this builds, and it's a very expensive, process to have accreditors. So we'd like to see as many as there can be, but basically you want to make sure that your universities and colleges really are that they're performing at a very high level and a high standard, but I think there are different ways to make sure that happens.
Yeah. Okay, is there, let's go to other people in the audience. I'll try and go to the back. I don't know how to be equitable in all this, so there's so many people. We'll do it geographically. There you go. Actually, people, you can just choose anybody.
Hello, my name is Benjamin, and I was homeschooled, and by age 12, I began college at University of Michigan and ended up getting my doctorate at Harvard. So homeschooling works. My question is, what can the Department of Education do to promote, while it exists, what can it do to promote more homeschooling, or how can it empower families to pursue homeschooling as a realistic option? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and that actually is, that is in the states, where that happens, and, parents decide how they want to educate their children. They should be able to do that, and so we need to continue to work to make sure we can get funding in for homeschooling, and that is one of the things that I think Congress is looking at today.
Great. Who do we have next? I'll just follow a microphone. It's so hard for me to pick somebody. There you go.
Hi, Maggie Little with the Herzog Foundation. The New York Times just released a report yesterday indicating that boys are falling behind in school, both with their academic performance and being more likely to be suspended. I'm curious if you see getting DC out of education a little bit more, if you think that would address this problem at all.
Let me see if I understood your question. Did you say boys are falling behind, or just boys in DC?
Yeah, in schools in general, young boys are falling behind girls.
I don't know about you, but it's been that way ever since I was a kid. I'm not trying to poke fun, maybe a little, but I don't really know what the answer is, to that. I think we have a responsibility in education, as I said before, not one size fits all. Teachers in their classroom can understand better, how to teach those children. And I think we need to allow teachers to be more innovative and allow teachers to teach. Today, a stat that I was given not too long ago is for every dollar that goes into the classroom, teachers spend about 47 cents of that dollar, in regulatory compliance. Well, I'd rather for there not to be so many regulations and let teachers be focusing on the students in those classrooms. And that's what we need to do.
All right, I have a question online from Vicki Murray. She says, living in Washington State, and this gets to something I always find a little ironic. So she says, living in Washington State, it's interesting that our state superintendent, along with others from different states, object to what they call the department's agenda, yet they also oppose eliminating the department. Do you have any thoughts about that irony? Thank you.
It is an irony, isn't it? So as we are winding down the Department of Education, it does sound a little bit challenging, or it is a little bit challenging at the same time, running in a parallel universe to make sure that we are getting the policies and the programs for the legacy that we want to leave, that states have best practices at hand and the tools to accomplish those best practices. So it's kind of, having a foot in both camps for at the same time. It is, but I think we are moving in the right direction, to do that. But that's gonna hopefully be the department's legacy as well as the president's legacy, that we have left states with best practices to accomplish the agenda that they would like to get accomplished, and some tools available to help them do that, like some of the research we were talking about.
Great. Someone else? Again, I will let the microphone go where the microphone goes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Audrey Scott. I am working with a group to try to establish the first classical charter school on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. We've applied and we have submitted our application. We are very concerned because we live in a very blue state with a very liberal governor, that if the money from the Department of Education at the federal level is returned to the states, there won't be any money in Maryland that will come for charter schools or school choice. And I wonder how you would be able to require and mandate that charter schools and school choice would be given any kind of consideration if the federal money returns to the states.
Well, one thing that might be very heartening to you is that the president is very supportive of charter schools, and actually not only did he keep funding level in his budget that he's recommended, but he has also recommended an increase of $60 million. So the president is very much on board with making sure that the funding is in place for charter schools. And I know that classical charter schools are really on the forefront of getting some fund. I don't know in your particular state, but classical charter schools, I visited a couple of them in Florida recently and was so impressed with the results that they're getting.
Well, we're hoping to establish one in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Thank you so much.
Well, best of luck with that.
I got a packet for you that I would like to distribute.
All right. We'll get it afterwards. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I just accidentally deleted a question someone has on here. It's going to be your last question, and it was so in tune with what I think that I can remember it, which is, it means it's very simplistic. But they want to know, well, what do you think is the role of or ideal role of the private sector in education? And I think there's a big role. So, but I'll ask you, because somebody, and they didn't have a name, they went by Anonymous. So Anonymous would like to know, what are some really innovative, important roles for the private sector in education?
Well, I think public-private partnerships are some things that really have advanced a lot of different agenda for a lot of different parts of government, not just with education. But, we have seen where scholarships, can be provided for school choice. I think some of the bills that are being offered today is perhaps that there are scholarships that are provided for students to attend a school of their choice by someone in the private sector or someone in the corporate sector into a 501c3. They get a tax break for that, but at the same time, that money goes to the child to go to a school of their choice. So I think that's just one example of the private sector that can get involved to really be helpful in school choice and to move a child from perhaps a failing school or just a school that is teaching more of the subject matter. Maybe it's a magnet school, whatever that is. I think that's one role that the private sector can play.
Terrific. I love that as the final topic, but I want to give you a chance. Is there any sort of one last big message that you'd want to leave everybody with today?
Well, I'd just like to, first of all, again, thank everyone for, especially for those who are tuning in for the streaming. It's nice to have you part of our audience that's outside of the room, but we have such a great audience here today, and thank you all for spending time with us and coming. I do think that the president understands, and he and I have talked about that education is a cornerstone of the success, of any society, of any nation, of any culture. And if we don't take the steps to preserve it and make it the best it can be always, then we're going to lose. You can lose your country, you can lose your culture. Education is a cornerstone for our defense system. It is the very bedrock of what we do. So let's make it as strong as we can. And it is not through bureaucracy in Washington. It is making sure that the states, our schools, our teachers are performing at the very best level they can, because that's where it all starts, because that's where it starts with parents and with families, and it has to be at that basic level to make sure we have the success of an educational system and a country that'll continue forever.
Terrific final words. I couldn't have put it better myself.
Thank you.
Secretary McMahon, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here this evening.
Thank you.
And thank you, Neil, for facilitating this thought-provoking discussion about why we should shut down the Federal Department of Education and how that can help our nation's students. Scholars at Cato have had a long-standing position that education policy best serves students when it's decentralized and handled at the state and local level. And it has been wonderful to host the Secretary as she pursues putting those principles into practice. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, and we'd like to invite you to join us for a short reception outside the auditorium in the Winter Garden. Thank you.